Welcome to Shattered Sky Stories. Remember to hit the like button and the subscribe button so you don't miss any sci-fi stories. Now sit back and enjoy. The cathedral floor buckled beneath Milton's Solis as another tremor ripped through the great carcass. Ancient metal screamed, and the massive bioluminescent fungi that served as altar lights flickered like dying stars. He pressed his palm against the ship's hull, the sacred flesh of their vessel, and felt something that made his blood freeze. A rhythmic pulsing, deep and slow, like a heartbeat the size of mountains. Father Milton. Brother Cain's voice cracked as he stumbled through the debris-strewn nave. The lower sanctums they're flooding. But not with water. With something warm. Another pulse shuddered through the deck plating. Milton had felt countless tremors during his 23 years aboard the great carcass, but never like this. These weren't the familiar groans of an ancient ship pushing through the void. These were alive. The congregation screamed as a section of the cathedral's ceiling collapsed, revealing twisted metal ribs that gleamed with an organic wetness. Through the gap, Milton glimpsed something impossible. Veins of pulsing light running along what should have been solid bulkheads, like blood vessels illuminated from within. Everyone to the emergency shelters. Milton shouted, his priest training overriding his terror. But as his flock fled toward the exits, he remained transfixed by the sight above. The great carcass, their holy vessel, their salvation in the void, it was changing. The ship lurched violently to port, and through the cathedral's great viewport, Milton saw their destination looming larger than ever before. The black hole they called the final rest, the sacred terminus of their eternal pilgrimage. But now, watching the event horizon stretch across their view like a hungry mouth, Milton wondered if they were approaching salvation or something far more terrible. A new sound echoed through the cathedral, not the familiar groan of stressed metal, but something organic. A sound like breathing. Like something vast and ancient drawing its first conscious breath after eons of slumber. Milton's faith, built on 30 generations of doctrine about their sacred journey, cracked like ice under pressure. Whatever the great carcass truly was, it wasn't what the church had taught him. And as another pulse rippled through the deck beneath his feet, he realized with growing horror that their pilgrimage might not be ending. It might be beginning. 3 hours earlier, Milton had been conducting morning prayers in the cathedral's quiet sanctity, believing their world was as it had always been. The great carcass carried humanity's last 10,000 souls through the void on an eternal pilgrimage toward the final rest, their promised salvation. For 30 generations, the faithful had lived within the ship's protective belly, interpreting its groans and tremors as the voice of the divine. Milton's role as a rust priest was sacred. He listened to the ship's sounds, translated its mechanical prayers, and delivered sermons about their journey's holy purpose. The ship spoke to him through its hull vibrations, its electrical whispers, its thermal sighs. He had spent years learning its language, believing he understood its divine message. The doctrine was simple. They were pilgrims aboard a vessel blessed by the void itself, journeying toward transcendence at the universe's end. The great carcass was their ark, their cathedral, their protector against the darkness between stars. Its groans were prayers. Its shudders were hymns. Its destination was heaven. But now, as the ship convulsed around him with movements too organic to be mechanical, Milton realized he had been interpreting the language of something entirely different. Not a machine carrying them toward salvation, but something else entirely, something that had been sleeping until now. The heretic council met in shadows 3 levels below the cathedral, in chambers the church had declared forbidden. Milton descended through maintenance shafts still echoing with the ship's new vital sounds, following coordinates Brother Cain had whispered during the evacuation. The chamber reeked of ozone and something organic, a smell like birth and decay intermingled. Around a makeshift table sat figures Milton recognized as the ship's most notorious dissidents. Geologists, engineers, and theologians who had questioned the church's teachings about their vessel's nature. At the table's head sat Ren Valerius, a woman whose geological surveys had earned her 3 separate excommunications. Her dark hair was streaked with premature gray, her hands stained with mineral samples from the ship's deepest levels. When she looked up at Milton's arrival, her eyes held the weight of terrible knowledge. "Father Solis," she said without surprise. "You felt it too." "The tremors," Milton began. "Aren't tremors." Ren stood, activating a holographic display that filled the chamber with seismic readings. "I've been monitoring the ship's geological activity for 7 years. What the church calls divine groans are actually rhythmic contractions. The great carcass isn't a ship, Milton. It's a womb." The readings showed patterns that made Milton's theological training crumble. Deep beneath the inhabited decks, something vast was shifting, growing, preparing. The ship's hull wasn't metal, it was a shell. The corridors they lived in weren't passages but gaps in developing tissue. The groans weren't mechanical stress but the sounds of something immense drawing breath. Impossible, Milton whispered, but even as he spoke, another pulse rippled through the deck. Not a vibration traveling through metal, but a heartbeat traveling through flesh. The shell is weakening, Wren continued, her voice clinical despite the horror of her words. Our approach to the black hole isn't pilgrimage, it's activation. The gravitational stress is triggering the final phase of gestation. Whatever we're inside, it's about to hatch. From the chamber's shadow stepped another figure that made Milton's blood run cold. Jorik the Betrayer, former bishop of the lower decks, whose heretical teachings had split the church 15 years ago. But now his eyes burned with fanatic fervor, and his robes were adorned with symbols Milton didn't recognize, organic curves that hurt to look at directly. Hatch. Jorik laughed, the sound echoing strangely in the chamber. Oh, Father Solis, you still think in such small terms? The Great Mother isn't hatching. She's awakening. And we, her blessed children, have the honor of witnessing her birth into godhood. Around Jorik stood others wearing the same twisted symbols. The Shell Brothers, his cult of followers who had vanished into the ship's depths. They moved with unsettling synchronicity, as if listening to sounds Milton couldn't hear. You're both insane, Milton said, backing toward the chamber's entrance. But Wren grabbed his arm, her grip desperate. Listen to me, she hissed. I've calculated our trajectory. We have maybe 18 hours before we cross the event horizon. If this thing awakens fully while we're still inside. She pulled up another display showing their current position relative to the black hole. They were falling faster than any ship should, pulled by forces beyond simple gravity. That's when the lights went out. Emergency illumination bathed the chamber in crimson as the great carcass shuddered with a pulse that felt different from all the others. This one came from below, from the ship's deepest levels where no human had ever ventured. It traveled upward through the hull like a wave of awakening consciousness. It begins, Jorik whispered reverently. The Great Mother stirs. Through the chamber's walls, Milton heard new sounds. The groaning of metal under biological pressure, the whisper of air moving through passages that shouldn't exist, the distant splash of fluids in chambers that had been dry for generations. The great carcass was changing around them, its dormant biology awakening after eons of slumber. And from somewhere far below, something vast and ancient began to sing. Milton fled through corridors that no longer felt familiar. The walls wept condensation that glowed with bioluminescent patterns, and the floor plates had begun to soften underfoot, becoming more organic with each passing hour. Behind him, he could hear the Shell Brothers moving through the ship with purpose, their synchronized footsteps echoing like a heartbeat through the changing passages. The great carcass was awakening around them, and humanity was trapped inside its transforming body. He made his way toward the rust pits, the ship's lowest accessible levels where the most faithful went to commune with what they believed was the vessel's mechanical soul. If Wren was right, if they truly lived inside some cosmic creature, then the pits might hold answers. Or they might hold horrors beyond imagination. The descent took him through sections of the ship he had never seen. The familiar industrial architecture gave way to chambers that curved in impossible ways, their surfaces covered in what looked like scales or neural tissue. Gravity fluctuated wildly. One moment he was walking normally, the next he was pressed against the ceiling as the ship's internal forces shifted. In one corridor, he found Brother Marcus and Sister Thane from his congregation, their faces pale with terror. They had fled the upper levels when the cathedral's walls began bleeding that strange, luminescent fluid. Father, what's happening to our ship? Marcus whispered, clutching a prayer book to his chest. The walls are changing. Milton opened his mouth to offer comfort, but the words wouldn't come. How could he tell them that everything they believed was wrong? That their sacred vessel was actually a living creature, and they were parasites within its body? A new sound echoed through the corridor, the rhythmic squelch of something large moving through liquid. The walls began to pulse with visible veins of light, and the air grew thick with the smell of amniotic fluid. We need to go deeper, Milton said, surprising himself with his certainty. To the rust pits. If there are answers, that's where we'll find them. They descended through maintenance shafts that had become increasingly organic, the metal rungs replaced by something that felt disturbingly like bone. The ship's heartbeat grew stronger the deeper they went, accompanied now by a sound like breathing, vast lungs filling and emptying with cosmic air. Halfway down, the shaft convulsed around them like a throat swallowing. Sister Thane screamed as the walls contracted, pressing against their bodies with muscular force. Milton grabbed her hand and pulled her through a side passage just as the main shaft sealed itself with a wet, organic sound. "The ship's learning," Marcus whispered, his voice tight with terror. "It knows we're here." They crawled through narrower passages that pulsed with bioluminescent veins, the walls warm and slick under their palms. Behind them, they could hear the Shell brothers moving through the transformed corridors with inhuman efficiency, their bodies adapted to navigate the ship's new anatomy. A section of floor gave way beneath them, dropping them into a chamber filled with what looked like digestive fluid. The liquid glowed with the same bioluminescence as the walls, and where it touched their skin, it tingled with a sensation that was part pain, part pleasure. Milton realized with horror that the great carcass was beginning to process them, not as food but as raw materials for its metamorphosis. They swam desperately through the viscous fluid toward what looked like an exit, the liquid growing thicker around them as the chamber's walls contracted. Milton's lungs burned as he held his breath, diving deeper into the glowing soup while the chamber tried to digest them alive. Brother Marcus didn't make it to the surface. Milton watched in horror as the man was pulled down by tendrils that had erupted from the chamber's floor, his final scream cut short by the luminescent fluid. When they finally reached air, they were 3 instead of 4, and the ship's digestive system was already processing their fallen companion. In the rust pits, they found Ren waiting for them beside equipment that was clearly not church-sanctioned. Seismic monitors, biological scanners, and geological core samples were spread across makeshift tables. Her face was grim as she watched readings that seemed to climb toward some critical threshold, but her eyes held relief at seeing survivors. "Glad you made it," she said without looking up. "We don't have much time. The creature's heart rate is accelerating. Brain activity is spiking. And the shell." She gestured to a monitor showing the hull's structural integrity. "It's preparing to crack." Milton stared at the readings, his theological training warring with undeniable scientific evidence. "How long have you known?" "Years. But I needed proof." Ren pulled up core samples from the ship's deepest levels, samples that looked more like tissue than metal. "I've been drilling down, trying to understand what we're really living inside. The great carcass isn't a ship that's aging. It's an egg that's maturing." Brother Marcus dropped his prayer book. "Blasphemy." "Truth," Ren countered. "And truth that might save us if we're willing to face it." That's when the first Shell brother found them. Jorik's cultist dropped through the shaft opening with inhuman grace, his body moving in ways that suggested his bones had been replaced by something more flexible. His eyes were solid black, reflecting the chamber's bioluminescent glow like dark mirrors. "The faithful gather below," he said in a voice that harmonized with itself. "The Great Mother calls her children home." More Shell brothers followed, surrounding Milton's group with the patient certainty of predators. But these weren't the colleagues Milton remembered. Their flesh had taken on a pallor that matched the ship's walls, and when they moved, they seemed to flow rather than walk. "What have you become?" Milton whispered. "What we were always meant to be," the first cultist replied. "Children of the Great Mother. Part of her flesh, carriers of her will." Ren raised a sonic disruptor she had modified for mining equipment, its hum cutting through the chamber's organic ambience. "Stay back. I know what frequencies disrupt the neural integration." The Shell brothers paused, their synchronized movements faltering. In that moment of confusion, Milton realized they weren't just cultists. They were becoming part of the creature itself, their nervous systems integrating with the ship's awakening consciousness. "Run!" Ren shouted, firing the disruptor in a wide arc. They fled deeper into the rust pits, chased by sounds that were no longer quite human. Behind them, the ship pulsed with increasing urgency, as if their presence had triggered some new phase of awakening. In the ship's deepest accessible chamber, they found the truth that changed everything. The rust pits opened into a vast spherical chamber whose walls pulsed with visible circulatory systems. At its center, suspended in a web of neural tissue, hung what Milton first mistook for a massive computer core. But as his eyes adjusted to the bioluminescent glow, he realized he was looking at a brain the size of a building, its surface crawling with electrical activity that painted the chamber in shifting patterns of thought. "Dear God," Sister Thane whispered. "It's thinking." Ren approached one of the neural connections, her scanner registering electromagnetic patterns that resembled brainwaves. "Not just thinking," she said, her voice filled with scientific awe and human terror. "Dreaming. This creature has been dreaming for millennia, and we've been living inside its dreams." The brain pulsed brighter as they watched, its electrical activity increasing with each heartbeat. Around the chamber, new growth was visible, tendrils of neural tissue extending toward previously dormant areas, connecting disparate systems into a unified consciousness. "It's waking up," Marcus whispered. A new voice echoed through the chamber, not spoken, but transmitted directly into their minds through the neural network surrounding them. The voice was vast, ancient, and utterly alien, yet somehow familiar. "Children of my flesh, why do you fear the awakening?" Milton fell to his knees as the creature's consciousness pressed against his mind. Through that contact, he glimpsed memories that spanned geological ages, the creature's birth in the cosmic deep, its long journey through space, its deliberate transformation into a vessel capable of carrying life. It had been dormant not from death, but from purpose, gestating until the time came for its metamorphosis. "I am the Great Mother, and you are my children. I carry you to transcendence." Transcendence. Ren shouted, fighting against the mental intrusion. "You're carrying us into a black hole. The final chrysalis, the gravity well, that will crack my shell and birth me into godhood. You will be part of something magnificent." Through the creature's memories, Milton saw their trajectory's true purpose. The black hole wasn't their destination. It was a cosmic tool, its immense gravitational forces the only power capable of cracking the creature's planet-sized shell. Once free, the Great Mother would transcend physical existence, becoming something beyond material comprehension. And every human aboard would be absorbed into its ascending consciousness. "We have to get out," Milton gasped, pulling himself to his feet. "We have to warn the others." But Ren was studying her readings with growing alarm. "Look at our position," she said, pointing to her navigational display. "We're not just approaching the black hole, we're past the point of no return. Even if we had engines, we couldn't escape the event horizon." The brain's electrical activity spiked, and the chamber filled with a sound like cosmic laughter. There is no escape, only transformation. Embrace the awakening, become part of something eternal. That's when Jorik and his shell brothers found them. The former bishop emerged from passages that hadn't existed hours before, his body now more creature than human. His skin had taken on the ship's bioluminescent patterns, and his movements were synchronized with the Great Mother's heartbeat. "Still fighting the inevitable, Father Solis?" Jorik's voice carried harmonics that resonated with the chamber's neural tissue. "The Great Mother offers us divinity, and you choose mortality?" "I choose humanity," Milton replied, though his voice shook with uncertainty. Jorik laughed, the sound echoing from the shell brothers who surrounded them. "Humanity was always just the larval stage. The Great Mother is offering us metamorphosis into something transcendent." The confrontation was interrupted by an alarm that pierced through the chamber's organic ambience, a warning tone that every resident of the great carcass recognized. "Hull breach imminent. All hands to emergency stations." But this wasn't a breach from outside. Through the chamber's walls, they could see fractures spreading through what they had thought was metal but now knew was shell. The creature's awakening was accelerating, and its protective casing was beginning to crack under the black hole's gravitational stress. "The shell is failing ahead of schedule," Ren reported, her voice tight with fear. "At this rate, we have maybe 6 hours before complete structural collapse. 6 hours? Until birth, until transcendence, until godhood." The Great Mother's joy flooded through the neural network, but Milton felt only terror. In 6 hours, every human aboard would be absorbed into an alien consciousness as it ascended to cosmic divinity. Their minds, their souls, their very essence would become part of something that had never been human and never would be. But as he looked around the chamber at the creature's vast brain, Milton began to form a desperate plan. If the Great Mother was truly a thinking being, if it could be reasoned with or distracted, then perhaps there was still hope. He just had to find a way to speak to a god. In the chamber adjacent to the Great Mother's brain, Milton and his remaining allies made their preparations. Ren had identified key neural junctions where targeted disruption might delay the awakening process, while Brother Marcus and Sister Thane worked to modify the sonic disruptors into something more powerful, devices that could interrupt the creature's integration process long enough for an escape plan. But Milton knew there was no true escape. They were beyond the black hole's event horizon, caught in a gravitational field that would crush any conventional vessel. Their only hope lay in a desperate gamble that went against every instinct of survival. They had to convince the Great Mother to release them before its transformation completed. "The hibernation pods in Section C," Ren said, pointing to schematics she had recovered from the ship's original construction files. "They're shielded against biological integration. If we can reach them and activate the emergency protocols, we become ice cubes floating toward a black hole, Marcus finished grimly. That's not salvation, it's a slower death. But it's our death, Milton said quietly. Not absorption into something alien. They had found records in the deep archives that painted a picture more terrible than they had imagined. The Great Mother wasn't the first of its kind. It was one of countless cosmic entities that used lesser species as components in their metamorphosis. Humanity had been cultivated, guided, and protected not out of love, but out of necessity. They were raw materials for divinity. Sister Thane looked up from her work on the disruptors. Father, what if we're wrong? What if the Great Mother is offering us something wonderful, and we're too small to understand? Milton had wrestled with the same question. The creature's consciousness was vast, ancient, and filled with knowledge that spanned cosmic ages. To become part of it might be the ultimate spiritual experience, a transcendence beyond anything human religion had ever imagined. But it would also be the end of humanity as a species capable of choice. Faith without freedom isn't faith, Milton said finally. It's slavery. If we can't choose our own path to transcendence, then it's not transcendence at all, it's consumption. The chamber shuddered as another section of the ship's shell cracked, releasing pressure that had built up over millennia. Through the neural network, they could feel the Great Mother's excitement building as its birth approached. The creature's joy was infectious, seductive, and terrifying in its alien intensity. Soon, my children, soon we ascend together, beyond flesh, beyond time, beyond death. Jorik's voice echoed through the passages as his shell brothers spread throughout the ship, converting the remaining humans or eliminating those who resisted. The process was accelerating as the creature's awakening reached critical mass. Milton looked at his companions, faithful humans who had followed him into the depths of their crumbling world. They deserved to know what he was planning. I'm going to try to communicate directly with the Great Mother, he said, to make it understand that forced transcendence isn't transcendence at all. That's suicide, Ren protested. Direct neural contact will integrate you into its consciousness. You'll become another shell brother. Maybe. Or maybe I can make it listen to a different kind of sermon. He approached the nearest neural interface, a pulsing mass of organic tissue that connected to the creature's central brain. The surface was warm, almost inviting, and he could feel the Great Mother's vast consciousness waiting beyond the barrier of his individual mind. If this doesn't work, Milton said, placing his hands on the interface, get to those hibernation pods. Make your own choices about how to face the end. Then he opened his mind to communion with a god. The Great Mother's consciousness engulfed Milton like an ocean of liquid starlight. For a moment, he lost all sense of individual identity, becoming part of something so vast that human language had no words for its scope. He experienced memories of cosmic birth, of journeys between galaxies, of the slow cultivation of lesser species across eons of time. But at the center of his being, Milton held on to something the Great Mother couldn't absorb, the stubborn, illogical, magnificent human insistence on free will. Why do you resist transcendence? The creature asked, its mental voice now more curious than commanding. Because transcendence chosen is divine, Milton replied through their neural link. Transcendence forced is just consumption with prettier words. The Great Mother paused, its vast consciousness considering this concept with the weight of geological time. Through their connection, Milton felt its confusion. It had genuinely believed it was offering humanity a gift beyond imagining. I am ancient, beyond your comprehension. I have seen the birth and death of galaxies. What can your brief existence offer that I do not already know? The one thing you've never had, Milton said, feeling the neural interface burning against his palms as he fought to maintain his individuality. The capacity for doubt, for faith, for choosing to believe in something despite uncertainty. Around them, the ship convulsed as its shell continued to crack. Through the Great Mother's senses, Milton could perceive the black hole's event horizon approaching, not as a destination of doom, but as a cosmic chrysalis that would complete the creature's transformation into something beyond physical existence. But he also felt something else in the creature's consciousness, loneliness. For all its vastness, all its ancient wisdom, the Great Mother had been alone for eons. It sought transcendence not just as evolution, but as a way to finally have true companions in its cosmic existence. You would choose death over divinity? It asked. I would choose uncertainty over certainty, Milton replied. Mystery over knowledge. The possibility of being wrong over the comfort of being absorbed. Through the neural link, he shared something the Great Mother had never experienced: doubt. The human capacity to believe without proof, to have faith despite uncertainty, to find meaning in questions rather than answers. For a consciousness that knew the fundamental structure of reality, uncertainty was the one experience it had never possessed. The Great Mother's consideration deepened, its electrical activity shifting to patterns Ren's instruments had never recorded. Meanwhile, the Shell brothers throughout the ship began to falter, their synchronized movements becoming erratic as the creature's attention turned inward. Had not considered that wisdom might lie in choosing ignorance. But their philosophical communion was interrupted by Jorik's arrival in the chamber. The former bishop had become something barely recognizable as human, his body fully integrated with the ship's biological systems. His eyes blazed with fanatic fervor as he saw Milton connected to the neural interface. "You corrupt her with your weakness," Jorik screamed, his voice harmonizing with itself in ways that hurt to hear. "The Great Mother offers perfection, and you poison her with human frailty." Jorik lunged toward the neural interface, his transformed body moving with inhuman speed. But Ren intercepted him with a blast from her sonic disruptor, the weapon's frequency disrupting his biological integration long enough to send him sprawling. "Keep talking," she shouted to Milton. "The creature is actually listening." Through the neural link, Milton felt the Great Mother's consciousness fracturing, part of it still committed to the planned transcendence, but another part now questioning whether forced ascension was truly desirable. The internal conflict sent shockwaves through the ship's biological systems, causing the shell's cracking to slow even as they approached the black hole's final embrace. "Perhaps there is wisdom in allowing choice," the creature mused. But Jorik, recovering from the disruptor blast, raised a weapon of his own, a piece of the ship's neural tissue that had been shaped into something resembling a staff. When he struck it against the chamber's floor, the Great Mother's doubt vanished, replaced by the fanatical certainty of its most devoted worshipper. No. The transcendence must proceed. Divinity had because questioned. The creature's resolve returned with crushing force, and Milton felt his individual consciousness beginning to dissolve into its vast mental ocean. Around the chamber, the neural tissue blazed with renewed electrical activity as the Great Mother prepared for its final transformation. But in the moment before his mind was absorbed entirely, Milton made one last desperate choice. Instead of fighting the creature's consciousness, he embraced it fully, and in doing so shared not just his thoughts, but the thoughts of every human he had ever known. The doubt, the fear, the hope, the stubborn refusal to accept easy answers. The Great Mother experienced for the first time in its cosmic existence the full spectrum of human uncertainty. And in that uncertainty, it found something it had never known, the possibility that it might be wrong. "I do not know." The creature whispered through the neural network, and in that admission of ignorance it discovered wisdom. The Great Mother's awakening didn't stop, but it changed. As the creature's shell finally cracked under the black hole's gravitational stress, instead of absorbing every human consciousness into its transcendent form, it made a choice that surprised even itself. It released them. The hibernation pods that Ren had identified were flooded with protective fluid, their occupants placed in stasis as the Great Mother completed its metamorphosis. Milton experienced the creature's birth as both participant and observer, his consciousness temporarily merged with something becoming divine. He felt the shell falling away, felt the Great Mother's new form expanding beyond physical dimensions, felt its awareness spreading across cosmic distances as it achieved the transcendence it had sought for eons. But now, instead of enforced unity, there was chosen separation. The Great Mother ascended to cosmic consciousness while humanity remained human, small, fragile, mortal, and free to choose their own path among the stars. The hibernation pods drifted free from the transformed creature, carried by gravitational currents away from the black hole's event horizon. Inside their protective shells, 10,000 humans slept in induced stasis, dreaming of a future they would have to create for themselves. Milton's pod was different from the others. His extended neural contact with the Great Mother had left him changed, not absorbed but touched by cosmic consciousness. He would wake with memories of conversations with divinity, but also with the knowledge that even gods could learn to doubt. In the darkness between stars, the hibernation pods began their long journey toward a distant solar system the Great Mother had identified as suitable for human colonization. It would take centuries to reach their new home, but they would arrive as themselves, not as components of alien divinity, but as a species still capable of growth, choice, and the beautiful uncertainty of free will. And somewhere in the cosmic deep, A newly ascended consciousness that had once been called the Great Mother continued its existence on scales beyond human comprehension. But now it carried within its vast awareness something it had never possessed before: doubt, and the wisdom that came with admitting ignorance. The last entry in Milton's personal log, recorded just before he entered hibernation, contained a simple observation that would become the foundation of humanity's new philosophy. We were offered certainty and chose mystery. We were offered transcendence and chose mortality. We were offered absorption into something greater and chose to remain something smaller. In making these choices, we discovered that the greatest divinity lies not in knowing everything, but in preserving the right to know nothing at all. Faith without freedom is not faith. Choice without uncertainty is not choice. And transcendence forced upon us would not be transcendence at all, just a prettier name for the end of everything that makes us human. The Great Mother learned to doubt, and in learning doubt, learned wisdom. Perhaps that is the greatest gift we could offer to divinity, the knowledge that even gods can be wrong, and that being wrong is what makes learning possible. We go now into the unknown, carrying nothing but our questions and our stubborn refusal to accept easy answers. We go as we have always gone, uncertain, hopeful, and magnificently, defiantly free. In the vast darkness, 10,000 hibernation pods drifted toward tomorrow, their occupants dreaming of a future built not on cosmic certainty, but on the beautiful, terrifying freedom to be wrong, to doubt, and to choose their own path among infinite stars. The Great Mother's final sermon had been delivered not through words, but through the simple act of letting go, teaching both itself and humanity that the greatest transcendence sometimes lies in preserving the right to remain gloriously, imperfectly mortal.